The Retirement Cafe Podcast, Episode 19, Successful Retirement Planning from an Ex-Financial Conduct Authority Regulator's Point of View with Rory Percival.
Retired or thinking about retirement? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe Podcast. In each episode, we bring you an important conversation with insight, tips and knowledge, all designed to help you live a fulfilling and successful life in retirement. Here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner and accredited later life advisor, Justin King.
So, welcome once again to the Retirement Cafe Podcast. I'm really excited, would you believe, to be joined by Rory Percival. Now, Rory, I've known for quite a few years, and he is he used to be a regulator at the Financial Conduct Authority, would you believe? Now, I get on with talking and pleasant terms with Rory, would you believe, which is quite fantastic. And I was chatting to Rory a few weeks ago when we met at a conference, and he was telling me about his plans for retirement. So I'm really pleased he's found time, when he's a little bit under the weather, he's found time to chat to me today about how his career has unfolded, how he ended up being a regulator, how he ended up being an ex-regulator, and now what his plans for retirement. So welcome, Rory.
Hi there.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Sort of, yeah.
Sort of. Apart from a slight temperature from some poorliness. So, Rory, can you tell me and our listeners, of course, a bit about your career and a bit about what it was like being a regulator and your plans for retirement?
Sure. I like many advisors and other people in the sector, I fell into financial services almost by accident in the late 80s, and I was in advisory firms for the best part of 20 years. Initially, as an advisor, but increasingly became interested in the sort of technical side, and moving on from that, it was a natural progression to move into the compliance side, which was certainly from a career perspective quite a good area to be in. And having been in compliance, I then in 2006 joined the regulator, having been made redundant from my previous job, and it was kind of the obvious. My friends would all say, he was bound to end up at the regulator." So I was there for 10 years. I left in towards the end of 2016 after 10 years. The idea, and it originally came about as to avoid some regret, as it happens, because the plan had always been for many years to retire. Maybe not completely, but retire mainly from the age of 55. And 2-3 years ago, I thought, well, if I'm going to retire at 55 and then just do a little bit of consultancy, what would happen if I suddenly think, well, actually, this is quite fun. Why didn't I do this earlier? So that's actually one of the main reasons why I left the FCA back in 2016 is to avoid that hitting 55 and that moment of regret. So I started doing the consultancy back at that stage. It turned out to be perfect choice, because I've really enjoyed my time outside of the regulator. And I hit 55 last month. So although I'm not retiring substantially, I am now in semi-retirement, having given up one of the main strands of work that I have been doing. That's to say consultancy. So I kind of now just do the speaking events, write the occasional guide, and I've got a few directorships.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. And so, tell me what retirement looks like. I mean, how do you view it? You had this kind of cliff edge, I suppose, of 55, which I presume was driven a little bit around about, 55 is when you can access any pension savings, possibly. Was that the reason for that age, or was it?
It actually wasn't, because this desire to retire at 55 goes a long way back, well before the retirement age moved from 50 to 55. I think it was just, I wanted to retire early, and 50 was probably a bit unrealistic, so I plumped on 55. I stuck on Facebook last month about hitting semi-retirement, as I'd been planning for 15 or 20 years, and then one of my friends from school reminded me that it wasn't 15 or 20 years I've been planning this. She remembered me talking about this to her in my early 20s. So it was just a random figure that I plucked out of the air, effectively.
Right. And does that, I know you're married, does this dovetail with your wife's retirement age?
No, this is slightly problematic. I mean, the position is she works for a large pharmaceutical company as a scientist, and her scheme. She's in a final salary scheme. Her normal retirement is 65, so if you like, a fairly traditional route. She's quite happy, wants to retire earlier, but unlike me, who can phase down in stages by just the decreasing amount of work I'm doing, that's not really an option for a scientist. There isn't really a market for doing consultancy. Yes, you could go down to 4 days and things like that, but not that same degree of flexibility that I've got. So at some point, she's got to jump off the cliff and retire. So the current plan is that you asked earlier, what does retirement feel like? Well, it doesn't feel like retirement at the moment because I'm on a tour of conferences, so I'm actually sort of pretty much full-time working at the moment.
Right.
It's kind of quite lumpy. So there's periods where I'm not doing anything at all, and then there's periods where I'm quite busy. So I think her position is that she's a little bit skeptical about my retirement plans. I have said before that I'll be winding back, and it didn't happen. So she's kind of saying, well, when we get to the stage where I'm working hardly at all and she's getting a bit left out because I'm going off and doing lots of fun stuff and she's working, then she will jump off and retire.
Right.
So hopefully in a couple of years' time.
Okay. Good stuff. So I mean, well, you sound like, there was no kind of cobbler's shoes going on. I mean, you obviously were a financial planner through your career. I mean, obviously on the technical and the compliance side rather than the customer interface, actually sitting with customer side. Yeah. But you obviously you created yourself a strategy and worked those numbers out.
And saw a planner about 5 years ago to confirm those numbers.
Okay.
One-off exercise. Yeah.
And has that been kind of plain sailing for you? Has it just been kind of very straightforward and very easy, or have there been challenges around that?
We're in a fantastically lucky position because my wife earns a reasonable whack. I obviously earned a reasonable amount at the FCA, and since leaving the FCA in consultancy, have been able to earn quite a bit more. We don't have children. We never wanted to have children. We've got a small house, a 1930s 2.5 bed semi, and we live a very low cost lifestyle. We have very modest cars, and we don't go on big expensive holidays particularly. Our activities are sort of walking and orienteering and things like that. So we don't actually spend that much. So we're quite thrifty, and so we have found it quite easy to save quite a lot, which obviously you have to do if you're going to retire at 55. And I've got quite a lot of longevity on my parents' side, so particularly my father's side. So I am hoping to live to my mid-late 90s. So we are talking 40 years here. So
yeah, and to save enough to, I mean, that's nearly as long as your working career, isn't it?
Yes. Well, longer, in fact.
Absolutely.
There is, 35 years or something.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's quite an amazing feat in itself. So I suppose this gives me a bit of I want to come back and touch on a little bit. I remember you mentioned to me about a little black book and retirement plans. But before I come back to that, to find out all the kind of exciting stuff that you plan to do in your retirement, I'd like to step back into obviously our listeners are, or the whole of the public who are thinking possibly about retiring in the future, kind of getting their plans together. And obviously they're listening in and kind of going, okay, well, that sounds quite good, but hold on, I've got, 2 kids and 3 kids and a big mortgage and, lots of expenses, etc. And it's pretty challenging, to put these figures together. We see in the papers, don't we, all the time about, I saw one at the weekend, you need £300,000 to retire, you need £1 million to retire, you need this, you need that. I mean, what's your kind of advice around this number people are looking for?
It's really quite difficult, and I think it's not a single number either, because within the sector we talk a lot about the shape of retirement income and having a higher level of income in the earlier years when you're sort of fit and able and want to go off on the cruises and the holidays and doing all the fun stuff while you're able to do that, but then perhaps not in the later years. And I remember my dad in his later years, he's now passed on, really didn't get out of the house that much at all, and so his expenditure was quite low. So I think the way we've been thinking about this is, have we got enough money for that later life? What income figure do we need for that later life? And making sure that that's in sort of secure types of income. Now, in practice, we've both got the state pension. I don't really have any DB schemes, so I've got a tiny one in the PPF, the Pension Protection Fund. But my wife has, most of her career has been in DB schemes, either the USS or her current employer.
Right.
So with her DB schemes and the state pension and a little flat that we have that we rent out, that's probably sufficient income for us in our later life, almost certainly sufficient for a later life. So then it's a case of, well, what do we need for that earlier period? And we have some figures. It's quite hard to say because you're not actually doing it. You can make some estimations, and you can only do the best you can. It's obviously better to overestimate than underestimate, and you've got to be able to work out what flexibility you've got in that. But in a way, because of my wife's pensions and our state pensions providing the security, my pensions then and our ISAs become the flexible stuff in the earlier period of retirement. So we can be more or less flexible depending on what actually happens in practice.
Yeah. So, DB schemes, and for the people who are listening, and we're using acronyms. That's a defined benefit pension, or sometimes called a final salary pension. It's a guaranteed income in your retirement paid by your ex-employer. In essence, it's deferred pay, isn't it? You've put some money away, they put some money away, and they continue to pay you through your retirement. I mean, they're wonderful schemes that are less and less available now for people retiring, unless you're obviously still in the civil service and in that sector. So people with those types of schemes, that's relatively easy. Now, one thing, close to your heart and close to mine, is that people have recently, there's been a lot of talk about people opting out of these defined benefit pensions, being offered large sums to transfer away. Now, and we also understand, I know the regulator, not under your watch, of course, but the regulator recently has brought out masses of new guidance because they've looked at the sector or financial services, the financial advice market, and gone, hold on, there's some rotten stuff going on here. There's some poor advice practices, etc. If there were people with those schemes in their portfolio or in their kind of retirement box, if you call it, what would your kind of very small bit of advice be about those types of schemes? How should they consider them?
Yeah, well, you probably expect me to say this, but I'll start with the FCA's starting point, which is to consider it suitable to stay in the occupational scheme, and it's clearly in your best interest to move it. And I would refer to what I call core secure income. I talked earlier about how much income do you need for your later life, but let's say you're talking about your fixed outgoings, your heating and eating and that sort of stuff, but also your discretionary spendings, your hobbies, your going out, your holidays, etc. If you've got enough core secure income coming in from the state, from a defined benefit scheme, from an annuity top up you might want to buy, from some guaranteed, what we refer to as third way type products that provide sort of a mix between an annuity and a flexible drawdown arrangement, and probably got good quality income from a fairly secure rental income. Then if you've got income from those sources that covers that income requirement, certainly the income requirement you have in later life, then I struggle to see the reasons why you would want to transfer a DB scheme if it forms part of that core secure income. I feel very strongly that people want peace of mind in retirement. They don't want to have that financial concern. They don't want to have that concern that they might run out of money in their later life if they've got just a flexible withdrawal plan. So you have to, and in a way, by being secure with your later life income requirements, you can be much more flexible with your earlier money situations. So what I'm trying to get at, I'm explaining this badly, but what I'm trying to get at there is if you have a level of income that is going to cover what you need in your later life, you can then, to be blunt, you can then blow everything else you've got. because you know you'll have enough money to live on later on.
Absolutely.
And that gives you real flexibility in your other assets, your defined contribution pots, your personal pension or your self-invested personal pension or your ISAs, for example. You've got real flexibility there. But if you've moved your defined benefit scheme to a drawdown arrangement, you're always having to be careful about the withdrawal rates in order to not run out of money in later life. So you don't quite have the flexibility that you think having that pot of money yourself actually gives you. So I think I'm a big fan of security first, but security in terms of what you need in the later life, giving you that greater flexibility earlier on.
Absolutely. And I continue trying to explain to clients that as a financial planner, there's an awful lot we don't know. We don't know what investment returns are going to be. We don't know what inflation is going to be. And we don't know what the market economics are going to be. We don't know what tax rates are going to be in the future. There's an awful lot we don't know. So when you've got a guaranteed income in the future, and you do know that, that's a really kind of cornerstone, isn't it, of any financial plan. So,
exactly.
So we our thinking concurs absolutely. So coming back to your retirement now. So tell me, you mentioned when we met up a few weeks ago about this little black book. Tell me tell listeners a little bit about your little black book.
There is genuinely a little black book that I've had for, I can't remember now, 7, 8, 10 years or something, which is a book it's just a little notebook that I use and keep by my bed and make notes in it of things that I want to do in my retirement. So there's a number of different sections. So the first sections are a sort of 2-page spread for each year from retirement through to 2054. I thought I'd probably not be doing much at that stage. And then the next section is, and that's got things in like when the Olympics are, when the World Cups are, when the Lions Tours are, and things like that.
Great.
And the next section is a 2-page spread for each month of the year, because certain things happen in certain times of the year, like the Six Nations events or the Autumn Internationals or the proms or whatever it happens to be. So that's just to remind me how to plan out my time by year and by month. And then the rest of it is kind of just a page, there's pages for walks, long distance walks I want to go on. There's pages for places I want to visit. There's a sort of odds page of all sorts of odds and ends of things. And there's a few slightly bizarre things in there as well. But just, and I read magazines, for walking magazines or whatever. And they're talking about somewhere in France or Italy or wherever it happens to be that they've gone to, and it looks fantastic, and I'll write that in my little book that's somewhere I want to go.
Brilliant. You have to tell me at least one of the bizarre things in there.
One of them is I quite fancy the idea of I'm quite quirky in some respects. I quite fancy being a dog's body, literally. Right. And what I mean is SADA, the Search and Rescue Dogs Association.
Yeah.
They're search dogs for people who are lost on the hills.
Right.
Obviously, you have to get trained. And one of the ways they do that is to get a person to go and hide in the hills somewhere, down a gully or something.
Right.
And lie there until the dog manages to find them.
Fantastic.
So just sitting in a gully with a book for a few hours until this dog comes and finds me, I thought it would be quite a fun thing to do.
Yes,
okay.
I wonder if there are some people in the financial services industry who might say, well, you could leave him there.
I think you're right, Justin.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant. So I suppose what I'm hearing here is get a plan early. You work out when you want to go. Look at trying to securitize your income so you know what you've got to do, and then create some great plans of all the things that you're going to do, and live within. You definitely are obviously living within your means. The frugal lifestyle is allowing you to, in essence, to get that balance right. And of course, the travelling and the Six Nations and the World Cups and all those sorts of things obviously come at a cost as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said we don't go on expensive holidays. We do sometimes. We haven't for several years now, but we have in the past. Gone to Peru or gone to Canada or wherever. So there will still be some of those. But one of my other big plans is always grew up in a camper vanning family. And my small inheritance, such as it is currently sitting in premium bonds and is just enough to buy a camper van in a year or two's time. So even if we get to the stage when we're getting low on money and we can't afford the exotic cruises or far-flung long-haul holidays, we can still go on a holiday and have a really good time in the camper van. At probably no more cost than staying at home, or barely any more cost than staying at home.
No. Well, that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today, especially with, I know you're a little bit under the weather, and for sharing all those kind of, insights into how you plan your retirements. And I know, to me, you've always been the friendly face of a regulator, a real human being. I always remember the line, and hopefully I can quote you correctly, but it was just something like, do a good job for clients and then write it down. It was something like that. It was something of those words.
In essence, it's not hard, exactly.
I know you've got all these rule books and regulations and all the rest of it for the world, but really, look after someone well and then write down why you did it, and you should be pretty safe. So
exactly.
For the advisors listening in, do that, and for the prospective clients of advisors, make sure they're doing that. and absolutely. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me this morning. Really appreciate your insight, and I look forward to seeing you on the conference circuit sometime. And also maybe I will pass you my flask if I see you on the hills down the gully somewhere.
Sounds like a plan.
Cheers, Rory. Thanks so much. All the best.
Cheerio.
I'm very grateful for Rory to sharing his personal experience of planning for his own retirement, and he makes some excellent points that you may wish to consider for yourself. As Rory mentioned, securitizing your income for the later stages of retirement can bring a great deal of peace of mind to your early retirement years. If you can ensure that you're able to cover all your expenditure as well as any care costs that may be needed in the future, that freedom, that being able to spend more freely and enjoy the early years whilst you have the vitality to do so, can be liberating. Now, despite being a chartered financial planner himself, Rory sought advice from a financial planner to ensure his retirement savings would last his lifetime. I really highly recommend that. You can find the show notes for this episode along with some useful links at theretirementcafe.co.uk. To find out more about Rory Percival, visit his website, rorypercival.co.uk. And if you have any thoughts on what we discussed today, you can send me an email to jk@mfpwealthmanagement.co.uk, or you can connect on Twitter. Until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Cafe podcast with Justin King. To find out more, you can find us online at theretirementcafe.co.uk.